I now call Claire Baker to speak and move Amendment 1434.2. Ms Baker, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 2016 marks 40 years since Women's Aid in Scotland was established, bringing together the network of local organisations across the country. Local women aid groups were providing support and refuge for women and children fleeing domestic abuse in their communities, and the national organisation then gave a focus for pushing for political and social change, working to challenge and prevent domestic abuse. A significant part of that change has been in how the legal system, the courts and the police have all changed their response towards domestic abuse. But it was such a significant change that it was one that really needed to happen in families and communities and in workplaces. No longer could there be an acceptance that domestic abuse was a private matter, that it was the woman's fault, that she could leave if she really wanted to. It is in these areas that the work of Women's Aid and other campaign groups have been instrumental in shifting societal attitudes. It can be easy to forget that this was a struggle, and often it is still a struggle, turning a private problem into a public and a political one. But campaigners fought tirelessly to put domestic abuse on the agenda and bring perpetrators to justice. The establishment of the Scottish Parliament in 1999 gave a political focus to tackling domestic abuse in Scotland, and it has played its part in changing attitudes in Scotland and modernising our legal system to respond to the challenge. The Government's intention to introduce a criminal offence of domestic abuse is to be welcomed, and we look for the new offence to improve the ability of the police and prosecutors to tackle domestic abuse. The consultation and responses raised questions for debate, such as the extent of the bill and the definition of reckless, and we will scrutinise and look for opportunities to improve the bill as we get into the legislative process. But we are in principle very supportive of introducing the new offence and of the intention to include those who commit psychological abuse and engage in coercive and controlling behaviour. And while the Government motion highlights that the majority of cases are a male perpetrator and a female victim, the law will provide protection for all adults in an intimate relationship. A similar law has already been introduced in England and Wales, and we should look to learn any lessons from that process. While the legislation is important, it also gives us an opportunity to reflect on what more can be done to end domestic abuse in Scotland. Labour's amendment today highlights the progressive work of the domestic abuse courts and asks how we can extend this service. If we are introducing this specific offence, it seems to me that an extension of specialist courts could be a logical conclusion. We have also seen concerns raised over recent court decisions. I am aware of cases where the alleged victim has been sentenced to prison for their reluctance to answer questions in court. And Scottish Women's Aid expressed anger over the summer over a recent case of a surgeon who, after spending 4 nights in custody, facing 6 domestic-related charges over a space of 3 years, was granted an absolute discharge when he changed his plea before trial and admitted 1 charge of threatening and abusive behaviour towards his wife. There was no criminal conviction. In response to this case, Scottish Women's Aid Chief Executive Dr Marcia Scott said, "We need to end the postcode lottery of justice that women and children experience in Scotland, depending on where they live and how justice is performed in their community." It could be judged that if cases like these had gone through a specialist domestic abuse court, the outcomes might have been different. The extension of specialist domestic abuse courts would also look to better reflect the new offence, and I urge the Government to work with relevant agencies to make progress on this issue. But the legal process is only one part of the process for victims of domestic abuse. Advocacy, refuge accommodation, counselling, vital one-to-one support, critical emergency out-of-hours services are all crucial to supporting victims. The Cabinet Secretary will emphasise the resources the Government have put into these services, but he must also recognise the pressure the services are under, and I have received reports of victims being turned away from support, which is a situation that none of us wants to see, but it is a consequence of a squeeze on local authority funding, and I make a plea to the Government to enable local authorities to protect these vital services. It was good news today that the UK Government has agreed to defer the application of LHA rates to supported housing until 2019-2020, with the intention of then introducing a new funding model. The impact of this on refugees will be to develop further options to protect short-term accommodation, providing the same protection as supported housing in general. And I would like to recognise the work of all the campaigners in achieving this positive result. We also know that domestic abuse can have serious and long-term consequences for children, as mentioned by previous speakers. Children who witness domestic abuse have an increased risk of experiencing mental health problems, of developing alcohol and substance abuse problems, and entering into abusive relationships themselves. And as we progress the legislation, we need to consider the issues raised by Barnardo's, Children First and NSPC, and the potential for the bill to address some of these concerns. Crime is at a 40-year low, but the trend for domestic abuse is upwards. The most recent figure of incidents recorded by the police show a 2.5% increase, and while the figures on requests for information through Clare's Law showed that the law is effective, they are worrying. I accept the improvements in police response and increased awareness and confidence in reporting and the presumption towards prosecution all provide explanation or some explanation for this. But when other crimes are on a downward trajectory, we all want to see domestic abuse to be going the same way. And that is where we need to see more investment and commitment to preventative work. I met with the Violence Reduction Unit recently, and established at a time when gang culture and knife crime were increasing, the focus of the unit is changing, and their work on challenging notions of masculinity, working with young men and families is important, and addressing some of the root causes of behaviour, which is complex and cultural. I want to see perpetrators brought to justice, and this proposed law aims to increase confidence in convictions. But I also want to see fewer perpetrators, and we must do more to root out the deep causes of domestic abuse that remain in our society. I move the amendment in my name.